It's a special day on Fresh Air, the first time we've had a former Beatle as a guest. My guest is Ringo Starr. Today he begins a world tour with a performance in Japan. He's put together an all-star band that includes his son Zach, who is also a drummer, as well as John Entwistle of The Who, Felix Cavalieri of the Young Rascals, and Randy Bachman of Bachman-Turner Overdrive. Before Ringo began his tour, I spoke with him about his life before, during, and after the Beatles. First, I asked him why he decided to go back on tour.
Every couple of years, I feel I should get out there and do something, and this is what I do. So it's I was out in '92. I was first out in the first band I ever put together was in 1989, the All Stars, and then in '92. So it's sort of time for me to do it again, really.
This is another all-star band.
Another all-star band.
What do you like about all-star bands?
I think the really good thing for me about the all-star band is that, I don't have to carry all the weight. The other all-stars take the limelight too. And it's good for me because I can play drums with them. And then also I can come down to the front, which I never really did before, and entertain from the front, while on this tour my son Zach will play drums. So it has all those advantages of, I'm not up there for 2 or 3 hours singing all my songs, which I don't have.
Now, I know that you're featured in a forthcoming 10-hour-long television documentary on the Beatles called the Beatles Anthology. And you perform on it, I understand, with Paul and George.
Yeah.
What inspired you to get together for this documentary? I know it's something that you've all resisted for years.
Yeah, well, this thing's been put together. It was first put together in 1970, a long time ago, and so that we finally, through Apple and Neil Aspinall, a good friend of ours, we finally put it together. But it needed something new instead of it just being like the documentary, and so we all decided to be involved ourselves. So we are interviewed also to give our side of the story, and so. The follow-on for that was we were all interviewed separately, and then, of course, we decided we'd be interviewed together. And the follow-on to that was, well, why don't we make some music for it? And the problem we had with that, well, yes, it's really easy that Paul, George, and Ringo can go in the studio and make this music, but that's not the Beatles. So we needed something that, it would still be the Beatles. And Yoko came up with a couple of tracks of John's that have never been out there, just demos, really. So we really worked on them to get them, clean enough and usable enough, really. And we put them down on 24-track, and then we all worked with that. So it just seemed like, it's a natural progression. We're all loose enough to do this together now. And it made it real easy because now John's in it.
Through the demo?
Through the tape, yeah.
What was it like playing together again?
It was very emotional. I mean, it was very emotional, first of all, listening to John on the tape, because he is not here, but his voice was there. And then, we had to, we all called each other and spoke about it. We had to say, okay, well, are we going to do this? It's pretty strange. And we came to the conclusion that, well, what we'll do is we'll just feel, we'll just sort of say, well, John's gone on holiday for a while, or he's gone for a cup of tea, and that's how we got into it. So it felt okay, But we still have the difficulty of, the three of us doing anything. So it was a lifesaver, really.
Were there emotional things that had stood in the way of the three of you performing before?
Yes, we were all angry with each other.
Was it over money or music or personality?
It was over personality. It was over lifestyles. It was over, a million different things over the years that, we all like the family that have good years and bad years. And we just had quite a few bad years lately. But that's all sort of broken down now where, the first time the three of us got together to actually do the music was very strange. We were all like, here we are. But 20 minutes in, it was cool. We were laughing, we were having fun.
Did you all fall into some of the same patterns that you used to, or? Sure,
we all sort of have our personalities, our own personalities, but we also have our personalities within the group. And they sort of started coming out and showing themselves again.
But I mean, it's been like 25 years, so your personalities have all changed a little.
Oh, yeah. Yes, but, it's still when you put that combination together, you get a similar attitude. And we know each other so well. I mean, we were so close, through the 60s and through the 70s and 80s. It wasn't like we never spoke to each other or we never met. We just had never worked together. So over the last 3 years, we've been working together on and off. So, the ice was melting really fast.
Do you know when that was going to be broadcast in America?
It's in November. It's going to be, I think, 5 hours of it on ABC in November. There's actually 12 hours of it, but that's a little long for TV. Though I thought it'd be great to start at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and go till 12 midnight. It'd be fabulous.
A marathon.
But they've cut it down to 5 hours, and it's on ABC sometime in November.
There's a box set of Beatles recordings that were made at the BBC in the 1960s when you were regular guests on a radio show.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite track from that we can play?
Baby It's You, is that on there?
Yes.
Well, why don't you play that one?
Why'd you choose it?
I choose it because it's really a smooth track. I'm trying to drag up my memory of all those tracks because there's like 50 of them on the record. And I felt that one was really smooth and, it was real easy and it sounded great.
Okay. Oh, my guest is Ringo Starr. Can we talk a little bit about life before the Beatles?
Sure.
Well, you grew up in Liverpool. What was your neighborhood like?
Well, I was born at a very early age.
Yeah, right.
My neighborhood was real working class. I remember being conscious from a very early age that I wanted to get out of there because it was dark.
Dark from...
It was just dark. It was just a dark neighborhood, It was like they needed more streetlights at night. But, of course, it was my neighborhood as a child, and I have, wonderful memories of it. And the thrilling thing is that, my memory of it, because I'd left it for years, was like, this childhood memory that I had all these big avenues that we used to walk down. And then I went back and there's all these really narrow streets. So the memory plays games. But it was a loving neighborhood. I mean, the school was 3 minutes walk away, so, it was a real neighborhood. There was a pub on nearly every corner, which I got to a little later. And there was a park I used to walk to. One of my ambitions, which my mother used to tell me often, was I wanted to be a tramp. And so we used to walk everywhere. One of the reasons was, of course, because we couldn't afford to take a car or take a limo in those days, or a bus even. So we used to walk a lot. I used to love that. And there was parks around us. So it was a very poor neighborhood, but childhood memories make it quite romantic.
I know your father left the family, I think, when you were 3.
Yeah, he'd had enough.
So did your mother have a way of making money?
Yeah, she worked any job she could find. I come from a working class family, but they call it lower working class when you've only got one parent. And but my mother, God bless her, she did anything from scrubbing steps to working in a fruit shop to working in pubs. Anything she could to support us, because he forgot that part of the bargain.
Right. Now, I know when you were young, you had 2 long hospital stays. When you were 6, your appendix burst, and you ended up getting an internal infection.
Peritonitis, it's called, yeah. And that was pretty dangerous. It's still dangerous today, but in 1947, it was very dangerous.
So you were in the hospital for about a year?
I was in a year because 6 months in, I was getting rather well. And I got excited and I fell out the bed.
Oh, no.
and ripped open all these stitches in my stomach, so they had to dive in again and sew me up.
Oh, gosh.
So we're lucky to be here, Terry.
Yeah. Well, then you got sick again when you were 13.
I know. Well,
tuberculosis, was it?
Yeah, but that was from the area I lived in.
Industrial stuff?
Yeah. Where I lived, like, not every other home, but it was like, 6 or 7 cases in every street where people were just in the living room dying of TB because they didn't have a cure, of course. And again, God, shone his light on me in 1953 or 54 when they discovered streptomycin, and that's what saved me. So they shipped me off to a greenhouse in the country. A greenhouse? Is like a sanitarium? Yeah, just a huge greenhouse where instead of flowers they put all his kids in there. And let us breathe some decent air for a change, and gave us streptomycin. And a year later, I came out of there. Did you, when you were a kid, think that you were going to die as a child? I don't know if that really crossed my mind about I'm going to die. I really knew I was ill, and the doctors felt I was going to die 3 times, but we proved them wrong. So I was pretty ill, but I don't think I was thinking, oh, I'm going to die. I don't think that came into my mind.
So were you pretty frail during most of your childhood?
I'm still pretty frail.
Are you? Or?
No, I'm not. No, I got over both illnesses, and I'm fine now. I've been fine for years.
So how did you keep busy while you were sick? Had music entered your life yet? Were you listening to a lot of it?
That's where it entered my life, was because to keep us busy, besides letting us knit, they used to let us knit dishcloths.
Oh, wow.
It was really exciting.
Yeah.
And then, some teacher would come in with musical instruments, being drums, tambourines, maracas, triangles, all percussive stuff. And she'd put this big screen. I'm trying to let you visualize it out there, Radio Land. Big white paper with red notes for the drums and yellow notes for the tambourines and green notes for the triangles. And so she would point to these different colored symbols, and we would either hit whatever instrument we had. Well, I had a drum the first session, and I really loved it. And so they came back like a couple of weeks later, and they tried to give me another instrument, but I only wanted the drum, and that's where I really fell in love with drums.
Was that supposed to be physical therapy for you also, since it's such a physical instrument?
Well, we couldn't get out of bed too often. It was a big deal after 6 months in the hospital when they said, you can get out of bed now and sit on a chair. So that was the big move. But so it was just to keep us entertained. They never really came in giving us maths and geography or things like that. They gave us knitting and making things, paper mache stuff and things like that.
So what was it like for you after you were sick or while you were sick even, to be playing an instrument that's so physically taxing?
Well, I didn't have an instrument for years later. I made my first kit when I came out of hospital, out of biscuit tins and firewood. And then when I was about 16, I got a bass drum. That's all I had, was a big bass drum. And then when I was 18, I got my first kit. So I'd strengthened up by then.
And how old were you when you were actually playing in a band?
1 month later.
After you got the kit?
Yeah, because I was really lucky, because in those days, if you had the instrument, you were in the band, and because it was skiffle, so it was real easy. So that's how the guy next door, it was called Eddie Miles, but we formed the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group, and he was the guitarist, and my best friend Roy Trafford was the other guitarist, and we got another guy on T-chest bass, and we just went out there and played.
Now, when did you start playing rock and roll?
Very soon afterwards. I left that band, joined another skiffle group, and then I joined a rock and roll band called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. And we were still sort of folky rock, and Johnny Guitar, our guitarist, we were playing the famous Caving Club in Liverpool, and he brought a radio in to plug into. And, you can imagine the size of your speaker on a radio. And he plugged into that, and they threw us off because we were playing rock and roll, as we should have just been playing skiffle and folk blues. So, and then it started. We just went from there, and everyone got amplifiers, of course, and we were off.
Ringo Starr is my guest. So how did the Beatles ask you to join the band after they asked Pete Best to leave it?
Well, they didn't do it that way, you see. Pete Best was still in the band, and I was with Rory. And one day, Pete couldn't make the session, so they asked me to play. And we'd got to know each other in Germany because we were the two bands playing there, the Beatles and Rory Storm. So, we really became friends there. Then we kept back to Liverpool, and Pete couldn't make it one day, and Brian Epstein came and said, would you play the lunchtime session? And I said, sure. And that was it. And then we went for a drink, and that was the end of the story. And then a couple of weeks later, he asked me again to play a couple of sessions, a couple of gigs. And I said, sure, because I just happened to have the time. And then I went away to play with Rory to it's a holiday camp in England, Butlins Holiday Camp, where you go for 3 months. You play the summer there in the Rock and Calypso Hall. and we were the rock band. And Brian called me on the phone, and he said, would you like to join the Beatles? Well, I said, sure, I'd love to join the Beatles. And I said, when? And he said, today. And I said, well, I can't join today. That was a Wednesday. in 1962, and I said, I can't play today because, you know, the band would be out of a job. We'd have to wait till Saturday because by then we could get another drummer. And that's what happened, and, you know, everybody knows the story from then on.
Well, an interesting part of the story is that you showed up for the first recording session of the Beatles, and the producer,
George Martin.
Yeah, had another drummer all picked out, because I guess he didn't know that you had been chosen to be in the band.
No, he didn't know. Well, he listened to the band with Pete Best and didn't think Pete was going to be on the session. And so he didn't know about me at all. And so he'd got this drummer, Andy White, ready, a professional drummer, a session drummer. And I came down and I was just mortified. And he said, "Oh, we've got this real drummer here." I said, "Well, what am I?" And he didn't want to take a chance, because in those days, it wasn't like you could go in the studio and just spend your time there. You know, the session was 3 hours. You were in and out, and that was it. So Andy played on the single, and of course, then we re-recorded it, and I played on the album. And I sort of defy anyone to tell the difference. And that was it. But George Martin has apologized over and over again, because I've made him, for doing this to me.
Yes, actually, I think he continues the apologies in his new book.
I think he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did on Friday when I was with him.
Oh. So,
I always remind him.
Well, what did you think the Beatles' chances were of really making it? What was your assessment of the band when you joined it?
I joined the band because they were the best band I'd heard. And that was how I played. I moved my career through Liverpool, of course, to, you know, if I could get into a better band, I would. And that's how I did it. You know, my aim was to play with good players, and that's what I did. I mean, the aim was not really to, you know, be big and famous. It was just to play with really good people.
Did you change your sound when you joined the Beatles?
No. That's why they wanted me to play, because of the way I could play.
So when you joined the band, did you have to do, you know, the Beatles haircut and the suit jacket?
Well, that's the famous line. You know, John came on the phone saying, "Welcome to the band, but you'll have to get your hair cut and get rid of your beard," and which I did. I didn't have much of a beard then, but I did have my hair swept back, and we had it cut so it fell forward. It was part of the image, and Brian Epstein was moving them into like this image thing too, making them wear suits and, you know, not drinking and smoking on stage. So it was all part of the deal.
Did that come easy for you? Were you comfortable with that? Or?
Oh, yeah, because I'd been in a group that had suits. You know, Rory, Storm and the Hurricane, we were the top band in Liverpool because we had suits. And, you know, everyone else was just like they are now, actually, all sort of scruffed up. But we were professionals. You know, it's all funny to think about it now, but that red suit meant so much.
Red, wow.
Red, and we had green suits, so we could change. Big doings in the 60s, I'll tell you, big doings.
No, in the Beatles, did you have to, like, figure out who you were going to be in terms of your public personality in the band? Because everybody in the band seemed to get this, you know, public persona.
Yeah, I think mine just came in naturally as Mr. Dopey. You know, it's sort of like the comic clown, you know. John had that edge. Paul was Mr. Lovable. Well, I was Mr. Lovable, but the young girls loved him. George was this silent type, and, you know, I was, "Hi, what's happening?" And so that image, of course, especially through Hard Day's Night, is, you know, I've had to battle that since that day. Everybody thinks, "Oh, that's what he's like." And, of course, he's not like that at all.
Can you give us a sense of what it was like early on when the Beatles' fame started getting, like, so extraordinary that you couldn't go places without attracting crowds? I mean,
well, you know, we were young boys, and it was exciting where we'd sort of conquered England. That was the first job, you know. Just to get down to London and get in there was heavy enough, and then we'd do the continent. You know, we used to have this saying, "Oh, well, we've done Sweden, we've conquered Sweden, we've done France now, we've done Italy," you know. And then, of course, we were invited to come to America, and at that time we were really worried because we'd had 2 records out here, or they were coming out, and nobody wanted them. And by chance, George came over for a holiday. He was the first one of us to come to America, and of course he was going into record shops saying, "Oh, have you got the Beatles?" And they were saying, "Excuse me, never heard of them." So, you know, he came back saying, "Oh, they don't know us over there." And of course, the story goes when Capitol decided to put some money behind us to promote us, and we got off the plane to do Ed Sullivan. We had a number one. I mean, you can't plan things like that. This is just how it is.
Well, that first Ed Sullivan performance is one of the watershed moments in rock and roll history. What are some of your memories of
Ed Sullivan?
Of that show?
Well,
yeah.
Ed, you see, I thought we come to America and it was fabulous, and there was millions of people at the airport and they were lying in the streets, and it was yeah all over the place. And just my mind I have of Ed to this day, and I don't know if it's actually true, but my impression was Ed Sullivan. I'm waiting for Ed to say, there they are, they're all the way from England, and it's great, and they're going to be fabulous, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like Ed said, here they are, the Beatles.
Well, you probably couldn't comprehend the whole... Yeah.
Thrown to the lions. So to this day, I've always thought, God, I mean, we could have done better than that, Ed.
Well, you probably were unfamiliar with the whole Ed Sullivan phenomenon. I mean, the most low-key square person.
We did not know what it meant. This guy just booked us on a show, and we'd go anywhere for a gig.
So when girls started screaming at your performances, did you have any idea what was going on? Like why the screaming as opposed to anything else?
It started in Liverpool, and just.
So you actually knew where it started.
Oh,
I mean, I was
on like wildfire all over the world.
Was it frustrating to perform in concerts where you couldn't hear what you were playing because the audience was screaming so loudly?
It got frustrating in the end. At the beginning, it was just fabulous. I mean, if you can imagine you're 22, 23, and you go on stage, and all those people are just screaming at you, loving you. I mean, you were making and selling a lot of records and making good records. It was everything you dreamed of. And it just built up and built up. And, of course, around about 65, it started actually to get a little tiring because, we were starting to make really interesting records and we couldn't perform them. And it didn't matter what we did. People were screaming anyway, so no one was listening. And because of that, we were becoming, not the best musicians we would become because we could only play, the actual thing. I mean, for me personally, it's very hard to do this on radio, but I could only do the downbeat, check, 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 check. I couldn't do any fills or anything because they would just disappear into the cosmos. So you found yourself, you're just sitting there playing the track, really.
Do you have a favorite phase of the Beatles' recording years?
I think, well, you see, the very first record, making the first records was just a thrill. I mean, it was absolutely thrilling, and listening to it on the radio. We would stop the car when we'd be going to a gig somewhere, and you'd know, because they didn't play them every 10 minutes. Oh, it's 7:45 on Wednesday. They're going to play your record, and so wherever we were going, we'd stop the car. We were usually in a car, and listen to it. And the other thing we did, if it moved up the charts, we would always have a celebratory dinner. So if you look at Beatle photos and Beatle footage, you'd see them getting fatter and fatter and fatter as they were getting more popular, because now we could afford food, But and then, of course, from Rubber Soul on, the records started to really get exciting. The sound, we were really getting into the sound, making good sounds. The writing was getting better. Everything was picking up. It was really getting good. So... it had a natural progression. So, to say this period or that period, they're all different periods. I mean, I like the White Album. That's one of my favorites, just because I felt after Sgt. Pepper, which was brilliant, but it just doesn't happen to be my favorite. The White Album, we were getting back to being a band again. And, that's what the Beatles were. We were a really cool band.
Being a band as opposed to being artfully produced in the studio? Is that what you mean?
Even though we did it ourselves, suddenly the strings and the brass were taking the center stage around the songs instead of the group.
Is there a track that you like best for your own work? I'd like...
Well, if you want to play an early Beatle track, you can always play Rain.
Why don't we do that?
Why not?
My guest is Ringo Starr. It's something else about the Beatles. The Beatles were such an important part of... music,
life.
Period, and they're really a very small part in your life. I mean, a big part in who you are, but a small part in the number of years that you were a Beatle.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to get a sense of what it means in your life if you still feel like that is so much a part of your existence, or if that's something that you've really tried to move beyond and away from. And
Well, I don't think you can move away from it because, it was only 8 years of my life, but it's the 8 years that everybody really associates with. It's like, it doesn't matter. I've made hit records and, I had hit albums and I'm on tour and that. It always comes back to these 8 years of being a Beatle. And I think I just have to resign myself to that's what people want to know about. But of course, in my life, I've moved on. I've done other things. Barbara and I have been together for 15 years. Been married 14. So the love of my life, who's here with me today, listeners. We have our life we live together. But whenever it comes down to something like this, it's always a Beatle program.
Did you want the group to break up? Were you ready for it?
I think we were all ready in a way because it wasn't as much fun as it used to be. It was okay while we got in the studio for a while, and then, there would be some bickering. And nobody wanted to put in the time, including myself. No one wanted to put in the time and energy that it took later on. We may have done the first album in 12 hours, but the last ones were taking months. And, no one really wanted to put in that time and energy. So it was sort of just like a natural falling apart, really.
What was it like for you musically in the early years after the Beatles split up? Was it easy for you to establish yourself as a musical identity outside of the Beatles?
No, I had no identity outside of it, really, for myself. I mean, I was, it was the Beatles, I was in the Beatles, I was one of them, and that's what I did. And suddenly we weren't doing that, so I really had to think about what I wanted to do and, where would I take my musical career or any career. And so it took a while, for the dust to settle that finally it's over. And better pick myself up, dust myself off, and start all over again. And that's what I did. And, what would I do? So I called George Martin, who, I'd worked with for years, and I decided, I wasn't as prolific a writer as the others, and, I was trying to find myself, so I decided to make an album of nostalgia, really. So I decided to do all the songs that I'd heard at the parties at home, with my parents and my uncles and everybody. And so, I did that album, and then just by chance I was working with George in EMI, and he'd flown in this steel guitar player called Pete Drake. And I sent my car to pick him up at the airport, and he noticed I had a lot of country tapes in the car. And he came and said, see, you like country music, boy? I said, yeah. And so we got talking. He says, well, why didn't you come to Nashville and make an album? And I said, I'm not going to go and live in Nashville for months, because I was so used to us being months in the studio. He said, months? You kidding? We did Bob Dylan's album in 2 days or something. So that sounds good. And so we made arrangements, and I ended up in Nashville, and we actually did the album in a day. No, 2 days. We did 5 tracks a day. It was really speedy, so, that was okay. And then after that, of course, that's when it really took off, was I called Richard Perry, because Harry Nilsson and I were going to Nashville to do the Grammys, and Richard was going, so I'd worked with him through Harry Nilsson. I said, well, while we're in Nashville, why don't we do a few tracks? So Richard said, well, why don't we do this and Nashville stuff, and then why don't we go to L.A. and make a record, see what we get? And that's what we did, and that's when we got to the Ringo album. And then my career was off and running again.
It's funny. Did you feel like...
Did I do all the talking then, Terry?
Did you ever feel like what you wanted to be was a drummer in a band, but what was expected of you was like a masterpiece record because of,
No, all I wanted to be was the drummer in the band, and then sort of this Ringo personality came out, with Octopus's Garden and Yellow Submarine and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly, to make the Ringo album... we had to find tracks that really, would show off different facets of my personality. And Richard Perry, was very good at that, finding stuff, and then we'd listen to it and we'd work it out what we could do together. And also on that album, of course, I did have John, who wrote me a song, and I did have Paul, who wrote a song, and I did have George. So, everyone was playing, really, but we just weren't playing together.
I know you've been sober since 1988.
I am still sober today.
Did you have alcohol or drug problems for much of your career before that?
Well, it didn't seem to be a problem in those days. Though, you're younger and you can recoup real easy. And I did use and abuse even in those days, but it wasn't on a daily basis. It just sort of caught up with me from sort of 1975, I believe. That's where my real downhill roll started. And it just got faster and faster and worse, and blackouts and passouts, and found yourself you couldn't really handle the day unless you had something change in your attitude, alcohol or drugs of any description. And in the end, it just got so scary and painful and frightening that, I hit my bottom, just terrified, and God's will and Barbara's got us into a rehab, because I didn't know you did that, and but I was frightened enough to ask, you better get us in one of those places, and that's what she did. And from since then, thanks to them, thanks be to God, I haven't had a drug or a drink on a daily basis.
Now, I know your son plays with you in your band.
Mm-hmm.
Do you watch him?
Yeah, I watch him. Watches every move, the little whippersnapper. No, I don't watch him. He's a really fabulous player, and what is just exciting, it's like, I'm not looking at it all the time, but I just turn around and look over, and there he is, and you've got your son. I mean, it's just an absolute thrill that he's up there with you, and it just goes to prove that you give them one lesson and watch out, they're up there with you.
So he plays
drums.
So he plays your instrument.
Yeah, and
Are you flattered that he plays the same instrument you do? Some kids will do anything to not do what their parents did.
Sure. No, he's always been a drummer. Since he was a baby, he's always been a drummer. But he also plays good piano and good guitar. But the interesting thing with our family is he plays drums, and so does his brother. There's another drummer, so we are the family drummers, But it was hard for Zach at the beginning because he was always compared to me. And as a teenager, he used to take this very badly.
Before you have to leave us, I would like you to choose a track from one of your recent records that you particularly like.
A solo?
Yeah.
I'd like to play from the track Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go from Time Takes Time.
Thank you so much for talking with us.